This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I'm your host, Jared Turner, and I do have an inferiority complex, but it's not a very good one. My co-host is John Pasden, who told me he doesn't believe in absolutes and never will. Let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Jared Turner joining you from Utah here in the United States.
Hi everybody, I'm John Pasden. I am in Shanghai, China as usual. How's it going?
All right, John, we are staring down the barrel of summer in our northern hemisphere. Sorry for all you guys in the southern hemisphere. Hot weather's coming, which means
lemonade. I don't know what it means.
It means that, summer is usually the time when I don't think not as many people are studying Chinese. Maybe we're traveling. Maybe some people are going to China this year. That'd be great. I know, John, one for you, you're going to be taking a trip back to the States.
Yes, it is time for that. But maybe for a lot of people, because it's so hot outside, you want to stay inside with some AC, maybe do a little bit of Chinese study.
Maybe. And in response to our previous episode talking about AI and Chinese learning, we did get an email from a listener about that.
Okay, yeah, we got an email from Marlissa DeKling. She was talking about how when she has some Chinese that she's trying to understand, she'll copy the Chinese text and paste it in and then ask for translate, deconstruct, include pinyin, and then she uses DeepSeek or maybe sometimes ChatGPT, and then it just gives her like all this output, explaining it word by word, explaining the grammar, explaining everything.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And before we really dig into this, John, I know that she did say she uses DeepSeek for Chinese. She's found it to be better at explaining Chinese to English with cultural nuances. So that would make sense because DeepSeek is primarily a Chinese-based language model. And so I would make sense that it probably is going to do a little better in that area than like GPT.
Although, to be honest, the Chinese don't spend a lot of time explaining Chinese to each other because they understand it.
Yeah, that makes sense too. But evidently, I think that sounds like it works better. I haven't really compared the two and seen how they break that type of stuff out. But I would just inherently probably gravitate towards that. Do you have any experience in that? Have you seen any differences in the two?
I do use DeepSeek and ChatGPT on a daily basis. And I don't know, I don't see huge differences. I normally just use DeepSeek when I don't feel like firing up the VPN. And I think they're both good, so I just use them both.
Okay, noted. That's good to know. But their email inspired our topic today, because one thing I will note that in the many times I've been using AI over the last couple of years, experimenting with it and seeing how we could use it to learn a language, and also seeing other learners and friends and people I've talked to. A common thing that I've seen that AI will do, even unprompted, is whatever you're asking it to analyze or break down or translate or explain, it's always going to be using the characters with pinyin.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of pinyin right away, and it's just all over the place.
This brings back to my mind an article that I had written, John. Gosh, I think this was like 10 years ago, but it was called Pinyin Over Characters, the Crippling Crutch.
Yeah, so that was talking about other books, maybe other graded readers, or maybe textbooks where on the printed page, the characters have the pinyin right over them.
And I think anyone listening to this, and if you've even attempted to learn Chinese, you've probably seen this. So yeah, you got some text. It could be a sentence, paragraphs, whatever. And the pinyin is just directly over the top of those characters. So why is this? Why is this a crippling crutch? What's the big problem with this? We're going to break this down. And we're also going to talk about some of the new ways people are using AI to learn Chinese and how this problem is still there with a little bit of a twist.
Right. So let's go back to the problem. Like, what's the problem with having pinyin over the characters? It's so convenient. It's right there, right? Like, if you have the pinyin in the back of the book, or after the text, and you have to keep flipping the page. So inconvenient, Jared. How is that a crippling crutch?
Yeah. How is it? Well, here's what we do know. All right. And I'm going to take one further step back. All right. And why is it this way? Well, this is one of these holdovers from the Chinese educational system in China, is that when kids are taught Chinese or Chinese characters, in elementary school, what they first do is they teach them characters. They don't even know, they'll probably know the alphabet, but they don't really know Pinyin. At least most kids don't. And they're not expected to know it. So they start out with characters and they're like, oh, this is Wo, this is Ta. And, they go through the characters. And a lot of kids, these days, even going into, elementary school, they know a lot of those characters, but they already speak the language, right? That's one of the key things. And so they're starting to match sounds with these symbols. And so typically in that first semester, or sometimes even the first year, depending on where they're at, they may not even go through the alphabet or even going through Pinyin at all. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, is that in the Chinese educational system, they are focused on characters first. Pinyin is very, very secondary. And it's not until later on when they actually start introducing Pinyin and the kids actually have to learn that pronunciation. It's not something that's, typically as intuitive. And so when you get into like the second and third year, those textbooks, they have Pinyin above all of the characters in that textbook, because for the Chinese learner, they are focused on that character because that is what is easiest to them.
Yeah, I think the word here is familiar. They're familiar with the characters.
Yeah, they're most familiar with that.
Their eyes just go straight to the characters. And we think of, our alphabet as being simpler. I mean, sure, it really does have fewer strokes, if you compare the letter C to a typical Chinese character. But because the characters are what's familiar, the Pinyin is easy to ignore, even for the kids.
But that's a problem for us, people in the Western world and Western societies, where we grow up learning English, or if you're French or German, Spanish, all these other languages, it's based on the alphabet. And so those are, thank you, John, most familiar to us, those words, those letters. And so for us, I always joke characters kind of look like spooky animals, and they are not familiar. And not only are they not familiar, it takes time to build familiarity with every single character. And so when you have that Pinyin on top of, or just over the Chinese text, it can be very difficult not to look at it.
Yeah, I think the problem is twofold. Like, one, your eyes naturally go to the familiar letters of your own alphabet. But two, if you're trying to read the characters and it's kind of hard to remember and it's a little bit of a struggle to recall, and the answer is just right there, a millimeter up, like, how can you not look?
It's very hard not to. And especially, in your earlier stages, and I wouldn't even just say earlier, intermediate, even now, like if I see Pinyin over the top of Chinese, it's really hard for me not to look at it, even if I know everything.
Yeah, even now, after all these years, I can easily just read the Chinese, but sometimes I'll find myself reading the Pinyin instead of the Chinese. And I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I reading the Pinyin? Like, even now, that'll happen just because it's the familiar alphabet.
So we talk a little bit about this, why, it's hard not to look at that, but why is that a problem? That's a good issue. I've been in many different, educational programs where I've seen teachers give entire texts to their students who are in in different grades in middle school and even high school stuff. And they're, it's got Pinyin over the top of everything. So why is this a problem?
Well, if your goal is to read Chinese, pure Chinese, the way a Chinese person does, then at some point you got to start reading just Chinese, because otherwise you're not building that skill.
Absolutely. And one thing I have seen is that people or learners who are learning Chinese and in this way, they actually, I guess I don't have any empirical evidence on this, John, but I'm sure it could be easily obtained. But people who are learning this way typically don't really know their characters, or are not going to know them as well as somebody who has not been learning in this way, all other things being equal. And so the thing is that because you have that Pinyin over the characters, you're looking more at the Pinyin, and you are simply not really building that familiarity and speed of recognition with that character. And so I have seen kids in some of these dual language immersion programs who they're like in their 7th, 8th year of learning Chinese, and they've had pinyin over the top of text, and they just don't know their characters.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really surprising. Can you imagine like doing a bunch of math problems where the answer is just like right there in the side of the page or something? Like that's just not going to work.
I think it's an excellent analogy, John. So, yeah, if 5 plus 7, and it has the answer 12, everything's like that, right? I think that's a great analogy because you don't really have to figure it out. You never really figure out how to do it, or at least not do it well. And so that's why I call it Pinyin Over Characters, a crippling crutch.
All right, Jared, here's an idea. I've seen some learners do this. You take a piece of paper and you just cover up the pinyin above the characters. Bam, problem solved, right?
Well, that is a way. And for the disciplined learner, that can be helpful.
Although when you're reading a text that's more than one sentence, it's going to be multi-lines, right?
Well, obviously.
So if you're using character to cover the pinyin, then you have to be constantly moving the paper and covering the pinyin, like right as your eyes are moving to the next line, and you want to like not see that pinyin and cover it first. It's like I don't know, that would be a skill in itself, I think.
Yeah, that's actually a good thing. And I sometimes think about, that pinyin's almost like a tractor beam pulling in the Millennium Falcon into the Death Star, pulls your eyes. And not just that, what you're talking about is you're constantly shifting and you're constantly trying to ignore it. So that's definitely a big challenge. And one of these things that this leads into is that this also breaks up your reading. This is something we do see is that, let's say you know all the characters in the text, your reading speed's slow, and there's the pinyin over the characters. Once again, it's hard to not look at that, that pinyin, but it slows you down further. And one of the best ways to build fluency in a language and to build your proficiency is to increase your reading speed. And so this is also something I have seen with some learners is that, yeah, they know everything like in the text that they're reading. They have that pinyin though, and they feel like reading the characters is too slow or too hard. And so immediately their eyes will turn back to that pinyin. And once again, like, okay, I can read a little faster doing that. But once again, you're not really understanding it. You're not really building, again, that familiarity with the Chinese, which is critical. And in that also is one of the important things that, I think, John, we've talked about this, that's a little bit not really talked about in language learning, is that being able to parse the language in your head and really beginning to recognize, okay, what is a word? When does this character stand alone and when do these two characters go together? And pretty much breaking that up in your head and making sense of it. Typically, pinyin is kind of broken out. It's parsed already. It can't be one entirely run-on sentence. That would be very challenging. And so being able to build that familiarity and be able to look at the text and understand how it's parsed is also a really critical skill that does not get built when we're focusing on the pinyin.
Yeah, so if you have the pinyin, even if you don't need the pinyin to read the characters, it does help you with the parsing. And yeah, that is one of the challenges, and that is something you have to practice on your own. And to do that in like multi-line, paragraphs, like as you start to learn to read more and more, that's just a skill you have to build. It's a muscle you have to work out. So, reading the characters without the pinyin, parsing the words in the text, and not only that, but reading sentence after sentence, like that's hard. That's hard work. And to learn to read Chinese, it is a bit of a struggle and it is a bit of a mental strain. But you do have to do it or you're never going to get there. And the pinyin, if it's always there, you're not just going to do it on your own because the human brain doesn't like struggle.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I think an analogy about this too is it can be a little bit like using, like Google Maps or, your map program, John, for you, Baidu Maps, right? A lot of times people they'll just, you punch in an address and it tells you how to get there. It has GPS and it guides you. And there are, a lot of us now where maybe we don't know how to use a map natively, and maybe we don't really need to, but it always has to be oriented in the direction that we're going. It's hard sometimes to just read maybe a static map. And I think a little bit that's how like pinyin, it can be a bit of like that crutch. So it's more of a critical problem in Chinese because it's all great when you're in your safe learning environment and you are just have a textbook, you're in a classroom, or you're studying on your own with a tutor, yeah, that's great. But when you get out in the wild, it's a lot more challenging. And this also brings up some of these issues that if you don't really learn some of these characters, well, remember in Chinese, we have, seemingly infinite homonyms, words that sound the same, but mean different things. So how are you really going to start to delineate the difference between shi, shi, and shi, right? It kind of exacerbates some of those problems and those challenges that we have when learning a language.
All right, so I hope this makes clear that, the reason that a lot of textbooks sometimes put the pinyin at the end after the rest of the text is so that you can try to read the Chinese, by itself without help. And the reason our Mandarin Companion graded readers do not have pinyin above the characters, do not have pinyin, right there next to the paragraphs or whatever, is because you need to practice reading the characters by themselves.
Yeah, that's a really big deal. Being able to really focus. And, as you're saying, John, there's sometimes like growth in the struggle. If you're like, oh, what is this? You're struggling to remember. But when you remember, typically it helps to stick in your head. Sometimes you got to look up a character. Okay. You're like, oh man, that's a pain in the butt. Well, sometimes it is. But the amount of effort sometimes can correlate with your growth.
Yeah, but you also have to kind of train yourself to get through more text before you check. Because I know I've been there where like you want to be like, oh, the first character, is it the first tone? I want to check. Oh, the second character, is it the second tone? I want to check. Like you want to just keep making sure that you know what you think you know. But if you just let go a little bit and just trust yourself to get through more of the text and then go back and check later, it is going to build skill and it's going to build speed and it's going to help you work towards fluency.
And to any of you learners out there who are saying, well, without the pinyin over the characters, I can't read it. Well, if you can't read it without the pinyin over the characters, then it's probably too hard for you. As I said, also, there's some growth in that struggle. We also want to be clear about this. What we are not advocating is reading at a very high level of difficulty, where you don't know, a lot of these characters. So if we go back to some of the extensive reading scale, it's, if you reading below 90% comprehension, that's reading pain. That's pretty much 1 in 10 words that you don't know, 1 in 10 characters. So if that's your case and you have to have the pinyin because there's like so many of the characters and words you don't know, you probably should put that down and look for something a little easier. We learn best when we're reading at a high level of comprehension. The ideal is 98%. Chinese is it's always a bit of a sliding scale too, but really if you're trying to go for at least 95% comprehension, that's maybe 1 in 20 you don't know. It's better when it's maybe 130 and 1 in 40 you don't know. That's a better place to be. So if you have to have that pinyin over the characters to read it, it's probably too hard for you. You should go for something a little easier.
Okay, so now we know that a lot of you, instead of buying, books from a Chinese bookstore with pinyin over the characters, instead of that, you're just finding text online, or maybe you're having ChatGPT or some other LLM generate Chinese for you. And that's cool too, because you have all these great tools now and you can cover, different types of Chinese maybe that you're more interested in. But you have probably noticed that ChatGPT and, other generative AIs like it, they want to be super helpful and they're just going to throw that pinyin out there with every sentence or sometimes every word.
Yeah, I've seen that too, John. It seems like almost every AI, when it's trying to help you understand or learn Chinese, it's using pinyin along with it. So do you think this is good or bad?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's okay. Sometimes you just want to know what is that word and you want to see the pinyin right away. But if you're using it for reading practice, then it's not too hard to remember to tell it, hey, don't give me the pinyin yet, or maybe put the pinyin all the way at the end. Let me read it without the pinyin first. And it's happy to comply. But if you don't say anything, you're going to get the pinyin like right with the text way, in the beginning of it.
Yeah, and I will say this. I think usually if people are using AI to understand some sort of Chinese text, it's because they don't understand it. It's something you don't know. And I think what might be helpful for you is it's easy to just take that whole chunk of text and just put it into GPT. But what I might suggest is that maybe what you do is that you come across some words that you don't know, or a phrase, or maybe there's just a sentence you're having a really hard time with. How about you try breaking that one down, using the AI to help you with that? If there's something you do understand, Well, that's great. Understand it and focus on the things that you don't know. And I also think, John, that there are some, there are tools in browsers. There's little, hover over pop-up things. And I have those because, some of my business I do is sourcing and procurement. I'm on maybe different websites and there's specific terms and words I don't know or something I was not so clear on. And, some of those little hover over pop-up things where it recognizes the text and gives you a pinyin and definition. Yeah, I do use that. And it is helpful for the stuff you don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Jared, because I think that is a really useful complement to the text generated by ChatGPT, like in your browser. Because if you just tell it, don't give me the pinyin, and then any word that you don't know or any character you don't know, you can just mouse over and then move the mouse so it doesn't stay there, then you can actually give yourself better practice because the answer isn't just, stuck right there on the page.
Another way to use GPT is you give it there's something you don't understand. There's maybe a paragraph or something. You can give it to GPT and you can ask it to try to put it in easier, simpler, more direct terms. So yeah, you could go ahead and look up everything in there that you don't know. But the point behind that is that even if you do look up everything and there's something like, hey, there's 10 words or 10 characters in there you don't know, how much of that are you really going to remember? And the answer on that is typically not much, because when you're looking up a lot, you're taking, AI or Google Translate or whatever to translate a chunk of text, you're starting to really understand it in English or whatever your mother tongue is. And when you do, you're understanding most of it in your language as opposed to really understanding it in Chinese. A lot of it's not going to stick. You're just not going to remember much of it. And it's not the best way to really build your proficiency in the language. So instead, what you could do is that, hey, maybe there's some keywords that you want to learn or that you need to understand. And sometimes you might need to translate to understand what those are. Well, no, if you don't know what they are, yeah, you obviously got to have to translate and have some pinyin. But another way to do is to say, hey, I don't understand what this means. To the AI, and you can ask it to maybe retell it to you in a simpler way, more direct, something might be appropriate for you as a learner. And specifically, I don't understand what these words mean.
Yeah, so to sum up, you can tell ChatGPT, don't give me pinyin at all. And then you can use the pop-up browser extensions. You can tell it, give me the pinyin at the end. And then if you have the pinyin at the end, or if you don't have the pinyin at all, you can just copy and paste the parts you don't understand and have it give those like the detailed breakdown rather than doing it for everything. And, let your brain do a little bit of the work and give yourself a little bit more practice.
So to bring this all together, I can definitely speak for John here, is that we are not anti-pinyin. Thank goodness we have it.
Pinyin is good. Learn it early, learn it well.
And pinyin wasn't, I think this was something that blew my mind early when I was learning Chinese, that pinyin even wasn't a thing until when? It was like early 1900s, was it?
Oh, geez. The history of pinyin is kind of complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated, of course, and there was different forms of it.
There were different romanization methods, and they evolved over the years, and that's a fun history we won't go into.
But the point is that thank goodness we have it. So we are not anti-pinyin. It makes our lives, every Chinese learner's life, learning Chinese as a second language learner's life, so much easier. But we need to be really careful about building an over-reliance on pinyin. And fluency, real fluency in the language is built on characters. And I go back to a quick story. I remember once I had a friend in Shanghai who was learning Chinese, and he sent me a text message out of the blue, and it was pinyin. And I'm like, what is this? Like, who's doing this? And I think he had a new phone too, so I didn't even know who was texting me. It was so hard to read, John. Have you ever had someone do that to you?
Was it pinyin without tones too?
Yeah, pinyin without tones. It was nightmarish.
Yeah.
It felt wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so remember, just being a little more intentional in your learning, especially if you're using AI to help with your Chinese. Tell it, don't give me the pinyin. Also consider using these browser extensions for the pinyin pop-up so it's not like in the text and you can't help looking at it as you try to read.
Embrace some of the struggle. That's some of the growth there, but not too much struggle. If this is like a character, like, oh, I know this character, right? Okay, hey, spend some time with it. Just be like, wait a second. Just if it takes even like, 10, 20 seconds, maybe struggle with that a little bit. And sometimes I've also seen some texts where it's hard to do this specifically because everyone learners at different levels. But, I've seen some books, well, our books go to this a little bit. They don't want to put pinyin over the top of characters, but we have keywords that we don't expect you to know in the text. And those we provide a pinyin and definition for, like in the glossary or in a footnote. That's a great way because it doesn't create that over-reliance. So, but the main thing is, like we're trying to say here, is that don't create that over-reliance on pinyin. There's some of that, the growth and that struggle. And pinyin can feel a little bit like progress, but the character recognition, fluency in reading Chinese characters, that is the real milestone. And when you're able to read those quickly and fluently, then you're really making some progress in your Chinese language.
And remember, guys, the Mandarin Companion breakthrough level graded readers require only 150 characters to read an entire story.
It was so hard to write those.
But that's a good goal to work towards. Oh, and by the way, if you're not quite at that level, like you can't read 150 characters, without the help of pinyin, Allset Learning also has a book called Learn Chinese Characters by Reading, and it builds them up 10 characters by 10 characters so that you can get to that Mandarin Companion 150 character level and read a whole story in Chinese. And it's something you can do.
How convenient, John. It's a resource so that you can learn Chinese.
You can.
Thanks for listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. I'm Jared Turner, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, alongside my co-host John Pasden, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of Allset Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, and Sinosplice.com. Got a Chinese learning story? We want to hear it. Head over to our website and apply to be featured on the show. If you liked today's episode, hit that subscribe button and share it with a friend. It's the best way to help more Chinese learners find us. You can also leave us a review on iTunes. We love to hear from you. Or come connect with us at mandarincompanion.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for more tips, updates, and good times. Want a fun way to boost your Chinese? Grab a Mandarin Companion graded reader available on Amazon, Apple Books, Google Play, or wherever you get your books. Apologies to John Cena. We just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and is edited by Jasper Chua. And of course, thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pasden. See you next time.